The most dangerous assumptions are often made in the quietest moments. The neighborhood looked exactly the way it always had on a calm Tuesday morning. Sunlight spilled across freshly cut lawns. American flags stirred gently in the breeze. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically beside a flower bed while children laughed somewhere beyond a line of maple trees. It was the kind of suburban street where people smiled politely before driving off to work, where every mailbox looked freshly painted, and where nothing ever seemed out of place. Marcus Bennett stepped out of his black SUV, carrying nothing more than a leather briefcase and a cup of coffee that had already begun to cool. He paused for a brief second, taking in the familiar sight of his own front porch. Home had always been the one place where the weight of responsibility faded, even if only for a few quiet minutes. He reached into his pocket for his keys. Before the metal touched the lock, the sharp chirp of a police cruiser echoed across the street. A patrol vehicle rolled slowly to the curb, its tires crunching against the gravel shoulder. Officer Ryan Walker stepped out with the steady confidence of someone who had worn a badge for more than a decade. Tall, clean-cut, and composed, he adjusted the radio clipped to his shoulder before fixing his attention on the man standing at the front door. "Morning," Ryan called, his tone polite but measured. Marcus turned with a calm expression. "Morning." Ryan glanced from Marcus to the expensive house behind him, then back again. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Marcus looked momentarily surprised by the question. "I live here." Ryan's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Do you have identification?" Marcus remained relaxed. "It's inside." Ryan folded his arms. "Convenient." Marcus looked toward his front door before meeting the officer's gaze again. "Officer, this is my home. My identification is inside the house." For a brief moment, silence settled between them. Across the street, a woman walking her dog slowed her pace. A gardener stopped trimming hedges long enough to glance toward the conversation. Nothing dramatic had happened, yet the atmosphere had begun to change. Ryan stepped a little closer. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood." Marcus nodded once. "Then I hope you find whoever you're looking for." Ryan's expression hardened. "That's exactly what I'm trying to determine." Marcus took a slow breath. His voice never rose. "I understand you're doing your job, but I'm standing in front of my own home." Ryan studied him carefully, searching for hesitation that never appeared. Instead, he found steady eye contact and quiet confidence. Somehow, that confidence made him even more suspicious. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Ryan instructed. Marcus slowly lifted both hands away from his sides without protest. "I'm cooperating." Ryan keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got an individual claiming to reside at this address. Unable to verify identity at this time." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the speaker. "Copy. Any signs of forced entry?" Ryan kept watching Marcus. "Negative. Continuing investigation." Marcus remained perfectly still. "Officer Walker," he said after reading the names stitched across the uniform, "if you'll simply allow me to unlock my front door, I'll show you exactly who I am." Ryan shook his head. "Not until I know who you are." Marcus lowered his eyes for just a second before looking back at him. "You're deciding that before looking at any evidence." Ryan ignored the comment. "Turn around." A ripple of surprise spread across the nearby neighbors. Marcus didn't move immediately. Instead, he quietly asked, "Am I being detained?" "You're being placed under arrest, pending identification and investigation." Marcus closed his eyes for the briefest moment, almost as though weighing whether another explanation would matter. When he opened them again, his expression remained remarkably calm. Without resistance, he slowly turned around and placed his hands behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the otherwise peaceful street. Several curtains shifted as more neighbors peeked through their windows. Ryan guided Marcus toward the patrol car while speaking into his shoulder microphone again. "Suspect is in custody." Marcus glanced once at his front door before calmly saying, "Officer, I truly hope you're willing to discover the truth before it discovers you." Ryan dismissed the remark as nothing more than misplaced confidence. He secured the rear door of the cruiser and turned back toward the house, unaware that, several blocks away, a convoy of black SUVs had just changed direction, their emergency lights remaining dark as they accelerated toward the police station with unmistakable purpose. Sometimes the loudest sound in a crisis is the silence that follows certainty. The back seat of the patrol car was unusually quiet. Marcus Bennett sat upright with his cuffed hands resting comfortably in his lap, looking through the tinted window as familiar streets slipped by. There was no anger on his face, no desperate attempt to argue his innocence. His calmness seemed almost unsettling. Officer Ryan Walker noticed it through the rearview mirror more than once. Most people protested. Some shouted. Others begged. Marcus did none of those things. He simply waited. Ryan convinced himself that experience had taught him to recognize confidence that wasn't deserved. His radio crackled again. Unit 12, dispatch requesting status update. Ryan pressed the microphone. Subject is en route to the station. Identification still unverified. Copy. The transmission ended, but an uneasy feeling lingered in the patrol car. Marcus quietly broke the silence. Officer Walker. Ryan kept his eyes on the road. What? There's still time to handle this differently. Ryan let out a short breath. You're in no position to tell me how to do my job. Marcus nodded slightly, as though expecting that answer. Perhaps not. The police station came into view a few minutes later. Officers moved through the parking lot carrying coffee cups and paperwork, unaware that anything unusual was about to unfold. Ryan parked, stepped out, and opened the rear door. Marcus exited without resistance. Curious glances followed them as they walked through the station entrance. A young desk officer looked up. What happened? Ryan answered matter-of-factly. Trespassing investigation. Subject refused to verify his identity. Marcus calmly replied before anyone else could speak. I asked to retrieve my identification from inside my own home. Ryan ignored the comment and guided him toward the booking area. Before another word could be exchanged, a deep rumble echoed outside the building. It wasn't the sound of ordinary traffic. One officer paused beside the front window. Then another. A line of black SUVs rolled into the station parking lot with remarkable precision. Their emergency lights remained dark, but their coordinated arrival immediately changed the atmosphere. Vehicle doors opened almost simultaneously. Men and women in dark suits stepped out with disciplined confidence, each wearing discreet earpieces. Conversations inside the station faded. Someone whispered, "Who are they?" The answer arrived seconds later. The front doors opened, and a tall man wearing a navy suit entered without hesitation. His gold credentials remained visible in his hand as he scanned the room. Which one of you is Officer Ryan Walker? The question was calm, yet every voice in the lobby disappeared. Ryan stepped forward instinctively. I'm Officer Walker. The visitor stopped only a few feet away. Special Agent in Charge Daniel Foster, Federal Bureau of Investigation. He briefly displayed his credentials before lowering them again. I'm here for Mr. Marcus Bennett. Ryan frowned. He's currently being processed. Daniel's expression never changed. No, he replied evenly. You're going to remove those handcuffs. Ryan instinctively looked toward Marcus, then back at the federal agent. Not until I verify who he is. For the first time, Daniel's eyes hardened. Around him, more FBI agents quietly entered the lobby, positioning themselves without raising their voices. No one reached for a weapon. No one shouted commands. Yet the entire room seemed to understand that the balance of authority had shifted. Daniel took one measured step forward. Officer, he said, his voice controlled but unmistakably firm, you're about to discover exactly who you've arrested. Authority can command obedience, but only truth can command respect. The words settled over the lobby like an invisible weight. Every officer instinctively looked from Special Agent Daniel Foster to the man standing quietly in handcuffs. Marcus Bennett never spoke. He simply met Daniel's eyes with a slight nod, as though the arrival had unfolded exactly when he expected it would. Ryan Walker straightened his shoulders. If this is some kind of misunderstanding, he said evenly, we'll sort it out after we verify his identity. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. That's precisely why we're here. He reached inside his suit jacket and removed a sealed credential case. Opening it with deliberate care, he presented the identification toward Ryan. Look closely. Ryan accepted it with hesitant hands. The room fell completely silent except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. His eyes scanned the federal seal first, then the name beneath it. Marcus Elijah Bennett, Executive Assistant Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Ryan blinked once, convinced he had misread the title. He looked again. The photograph matched the man in handcuffs standing only a few feet away. His confidence began to crack. This can't be right. Daniel answered quietly. It is. Marcus finally spoke, his voice as calm as it had been outside his home. Officer Walker, I told you my identification was inside my house. You chose not to verify it. Ryan instinctively looked toward the booking desk, searching for someone to challenge what he was seeing. No one did. Instead, several officers slowly lowered their eyes, realizing the situation had become far more serious than a routine arrest. Daniel extended his hand. Remove the cuffs. Ryan hesitated for only a second before reaching for the handcuff key. His fingers, steady only minutes earlier, now struggled against the small lock. The metallic click echoed through the station as the restraints finally opened. Marcus rubbed his wrists gently but showed no anger. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voice, only dignity. That silence seemed heavier than any accusation. Before Ryan could form an apology, another FBI agent approached Daniel and quietly handed him a tablet. Daniel glanced at the screen before addressing the room. Director Bennett's. Motorcade lost contact with him 23 minutes ago. Federal protective protocols were immediately activated. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances. They now understood why nearly a dozen federal agents had arrived without delay. This wasn't an ordinary response. It was a coordinated operation triggered by the disappearance of one of the Bureau's senior leaders. Ryan felt the realization settle like cold steel in his chest. Every decision he had made outside the house had been recorded. His body camera was still running. Dispatch had logged every radio transmission. Surveillance cameras had captured the arrest from multiple angles. None of it could be undone. Marcus picked up his briefcase from the evidence counter without another word. As he turned toward the exit, he paused beside Ryan. A badge gives authority, he said softly. Character determines how it's used. Then he walked away with Daniel Foster, followed by the FBI team in disciplined silence. Behind them, the station remained frozen. No one spoke. Everyone understood the same truth. The arrest was over. The investigation was only beginning. Justice doesn't become powerful when someone loses. It becomes powerful when everyone is forced to face the truth. The last black SUV disappeared beyond the station entrance, but its presence lingered like a storm that had not yet passed. Inside the building, conversations resumed only in whispers. Officers who had once moved with casual confidence now avoided looking at one another. Every glance eventually landed on Ryan Walker. He remained standing in the middle of the booking area, the small handcuff key still resting in his palm. It suddenly felt heavier than the badge clipped to his uniform. A sharp voice interrupted the silence. Ryan, my office. Now, Police Chief Eleanor Hayes had arrived. She walked with measured purpose, her expression revealing neither anger nor sympathy. Ryan followed without speaking. As the office door closed behind them, Chief Hayes placed a folder on her desk but didn't open it immediately. Tell me exactly what happened. Ryan recounted the encounter from the beginning. The suspicious person, the unanswered questions, the refusal to allow Marcus into the house, the arrest, the arrival of the FBI. Each sentence sounded less convincing than the one before it. When he finished, the room fell silent. Chief Hayes folded her hands. Did he resist? No. Did he threaten you? No. Did he attempt to flee? Ryan lowered his eyes. No, she nodded once. Then explain why you believed handcuffs were necessary. Ryan searched for an answer that no longer seemed reasonable. I believed I had probable cause. Chief Hayes looked at him for several long seconds. Belief and evidence are not the same thing, officer. Before Ryan could respond, there was a knock at the door. Daniel Foster entered, carrying a slim evidence case. Chief Hayes, he said politely, Director Bennett asked me to personally deliver this. He placed a flash drive on the desk. It contains synchronized recordings from Director Bennett's security detail, vehicle cameras, and timestamp communication logs. Chief Hayes glanced at the drive. Body camera footage? Daniel nodded. Yours. Ours. Dispatch audio. Neighborhood surveillance voluntarily provided by nearby homeowners. Every significant moment has already been preserved. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. There would be no uncertainty. No conflicting testimony. Every decision would be viewed exactly as it had happened. Daniel continued in the same calm tone. Director Bennett has made one request. Chief Hayes looked up. Go on. He does not want special treatment. Ryan looked up in surprise. Daniel met his eyes. He wants the investigation conducted exactly as it would be for any citizen. The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Marcus wasn't asking for revenge. He wasn't demanding arrests or public humiliation. He wanted equal accountability under the same standards every American deserved. After Daniel quietly left the office, Chief Hayes picked up the flash drive once more. Internal Affairs has already been notified, she said. Effective immediately, you'll surrender your patrol assignment pending administrative review. Ryan slowly unclipped his patrol keys and placed them on her desk. The sound echoed through the office with unsettling finality. As he walked toward the door, Chief Hayes spoke one last sentence. This investigation isn't about destroying your career, Ryan. He stopped without turning around. It's about discovering whether the badge was leading your judgment or whether your judgment stopped deserving the badge. The truth has a strange habit of replaying itself until everyone is willing to see it. The Internal Affairs conference room was colder than Ryan Walker remembered, not because of the temperature, but because every chair, every monitor, and every folder waiting on the polished table represented something he could no longer control. There would be no eyewitnesses with fading memories, no conflicting stories, only evidence. Lieutenant Rebecca Collins entered carrying a tablet and several evidence folders. She took a seat across from Ryan without displaying judgment. Officer Walker, she began calmly. Today isn't about assumptions. It's about facts. Ryan nodded silently. The lights dimmed as the first recording appeared on the large screen. Body camera footage. The image showed Marcus Bennett standing peacefully on his own front porch with a coffee cup still in one hand. His voice was clear. Good morning. The recording continued. Marcus repeatedly explained that he lived there. He politely requested permission to retrieve his identification from inside the house. His tone never changed. He never raised his voice. He never stepped toward the officer. Ryan watched himself interrupt those explanations, each decision appearing more final than it had felt in the moment. The room remained silent, except for the recording. Then came a neighborhood security footage. From another angle, the encounter looked even calmer. Children rode bicycles farther down the street, completely unaware that only a few houses away, an ordinary conversation was slowly becoming a life-changing mistake. Collins paused the video just before the handcuffs were applied. At this moment, she asked quietly, what specific behavior suggested an immediate threat? Ryan stared at the frozen image. Marcus wasn't resisting. He wasn't reaching into his pockets. He wasn't attempting to flee. He simply stood beside his own front door. Ryan finally answered. Looking at it now, none. Collins nodded and continued. The next recording came from dispatch communications. Ryan listened to his own radio transmissions describing Marcus as an unidentified, suspicious individual. Then dispatch replayed every response exactly as it had occurred. At no point had anyone instructed him to make an arrest. The decision had been entirely his. Another screen displayed synchronized timestamps from neighborhood cameras, patrol GPS data, and FBI protective communications. Every event aligned perfectly. There were no missing minutes, no unanswered questions, only an uninterrupted chain of decisions leading to one unavoidable conclusion. Ryan leaned back slowly, rubbing his forehead. For the first time since joining the department, he wasn't defending himself against accusations. He was confronting himself. Collins closed the final folder. Bias isn't always loud, she said. Sometimes it appears as certainty before evidence exists. The sentence lingered in the room long after she stopped speaking. Ryan looked once more at the paused image of Marcus, standing quietly outside his own home. He realized something that hurt more than the investigation itself. Marcus had given him every opportunity to avoid what happened. Every calm explanation. Every respectful answer. Every chance to slow down. Ryan had mistaken composure for deception and confidence for suspicion. As the monitors powered down, Collins gathered the evidence into a single case. "This review is almost complete," she said. "But Director Bennett has requested one final meeting before any recommendations are submitted." Ryan looked up. "With me?" Collins gave a slight nod. "Yes." She paused before adding, "He believes the most important evidence isn't what happened on the street." Ryan frowned. "Then what is?" Collins met his eyes. "What you choose to become after watching yourself. A person's greatest trial is not the moment they are exposed. It is the moment they are invited to change." Ryan Walker arrived at the federal building just before sunrise. The glass facade reflected a gray morning sky, making the entire structure appear colder than the air outside. He had entered countless government buildings during his career, always wearing a badge that opened doors with quiet authority. Today, he entered carrying nothing but uncertainty. An FBI agent escorted him through a series of secure corridors before stopping outside a modest conference room. There were no reporters, no television cameras, no audience waiting to witness his embarrassment. Whatever happened next was not meant for public spectacle. It was meant for truth. The door opened. Marcus Bennett stood beside a large window overlooking the city. A cup of coffee rested on the table, untouched. He turned as Ryan entered, offering neither a smile nor a frown. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said calmly. Ryan remained standing. "I wasn't sure you actually wanted to see me." Marcus gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please." For several seconds, neither man spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was reflective, as though both understood that the next conversation would matter far more than everything that had already happened. Ryan finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Marcus listened without interrupting. "I judged you before I knew anything about you," Ryan continued. "I ignored every opportunity to slow down and verify the facts. I treated suspicion like evidence." His voice grew quieter. "If you had been anyone else, just another citizen, the outcome would have been exactly the same." Marcus nodded once. "That's the part that concerns me the most." Ryan lowered his eyes. "I know." Marcus walked toward the window, looking out over the city streets below. "Do you know why I requested this meeting?" Ryan hesitated. "To hear me apologize?" Marcus slowly shook his head. "No," he turned back. "Because this was never about me." Ryan looked confused. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I had federal protection. I had resources. I had people searching for me within minutes. Most citizens don't." The words settled heavily between them. "Imagine," Marcus said quietly, "someone without influence standing on that same porch. Someone whose phone call goes unanswered. Someone whose name means nothing to the system." Ryan felt every sentence land with painful clarity. Marcus wasn't asking him to think about an FBI executive. He was asking him to think about every ordinary person whose dignity depended entirely on an officer's judgment. Marcus returned to the table and finally picked up his coffee. "The investigation will continue," he said. "Its outcome isn't mine to decide." Ryan nodded. "I understand." Marcus looked directly at him. "But your future still is." Ryan frowned slightly. Marcus continued, "One mistake doesn't define a lifetime. Refusing to learn from it does." For the first time since the arrest, Ryan felt something other than fear. It wasn't relief. It wasn't forgiveness. It was responsibility. As he stood to leave, Marcus offered one final thought. People often believe justice is about punishment. He paused, allowing the words to settle. Real justice begins the moment someone has the courage to become better than the person who caused the harm. Ryan quietly left the room, carrying no promises, no guarantees, and no certainty about what awaited him. But for the first time since that morning outside the house, he understood that redemption would never begin with defending his actions. It would begin with confronting the man who had made them. The measure of justice is not whether someone falls. It is whether the system learns why they fell. 3 weeks later, the atmosphere inside police headquarters felt noticeably different. The investigation had concluded, but its effects continued to ripple through every hallway, briefing room, and patrol shift. Officers spoke more carefully. Supervisors asked more questions. Routine decisions were no longer accepted simply because they had always been made that way. Chief Eleanor Hayes stood before a conference room filled with command staff, internal affairs investigators, and patrol supervisors. A thick report rested on the podium in front of her. No one seemed eager to hear its contents, yet everyone understood its importance. This review examined more than a single arrest, she began. It examined how assumptions can quietly replace judgment. The room remained silent. She continued. The evidence demonstrated that Officer Ryan Walker acted without sufficient factual basis before restricting a citizen's freedom. The investigation found no evidence of physical abuse or fabricated reports. However, it also concluded that critical decisions were influenced by unsupported assumptions rather than verified information. The distinction mattered. It wasn't a story about sensational corruption. It was a story about something far more dangerous. Ordinary decisions made too quickly by someone convinced he could not be wrong. Ryan sat alone in the last row, wearing a plain suit instead of his police uniform. He listened without lowering his head. Every word was difficult to hear because every word was true. Chief Hayes announced the department's decision. Ryan would receive a lengthy suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and a comprehensive review before any consideration of returning to patrol duties. In addition, the department would implement new verification procedures, expanded bias awareness training, and revised supervisory requirements for investigative detentions. The consequences extended beyond one officer. They reached the institution itself. After the meeting, most people quietly filed out. Ryan remained seated until he noticed Marcus Bennett standing near the doorway. He hadn't been invited to speak. He had come only as an observer. Their eyes met briefly. Marcus walked over. The department made difficult choices today, he said. Ryan nodded. Necessary ones. Marcus looked around the now empty room. Real accountability rarely feels satisfying while you're living through it. Ryan managed a faint smile. No, it doesn't. He hesitated before asking, "Do you think people will ever trust me again?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Trust isn't restored by asking for it. He paused. It's rebuilt through hundreds of quiet decisions that nobody applauds. Ryan absorbed the words in silence. They sounded less like advice and more like a responsibility he would have to carry for years. As Marcus turned to leave, Chief Hayes approached them. "Director Bennett," she said, "your recommendation helped shape today's reforms." Ryan looked surprised. Marcus simply replied, "Policies matter because people matter." Outside the headquarters, rain began falling softly across the parking lot. Officers leaving the building slowed their pace, collars raised against the weather. Ryan stood beneath the entrance canopy, watching them disappear into the gray afternoon. For the first time in his career, he understood that wearing a badge had never guaranteed respect. Respect had always depended on the choices made while wearing it. And somewhere beyond the rain, Marcus Bennett drove home to the same house where everything had begun. Not because justice had erased what happened there, but because the truth had finally forced an entire system to remember who it was supposed to protect. The strongest legacy of justice is not the punishment it delivers, but the people it transforms. Autumn arrived quietly, washing the city in shades of amber and gold. Months had passed since the morning outside Marcus Bennett's home. Yet the consequences of that single encounter continued to shape lives in ways no one could have predicted. At the police academy, a new class of recruits filled a lecture hall where Chief Eleanor Hayes stood beside a projector displaying only 3 words: verify before you judge. There were no photographs of Marcus, no headlines about the incident. The lesson was never about one individual. It was about every citizen an officer would one day meet. Every uniform gives you authority, Chief Hayes told the recruits. Only your character decides whether that authority deserves respect. Across town, Marcus returned to a quieter routine. His position within the FBI remained unchanged, but he declined every request for television interviews and public appearances. He believed that justice lost something important when it became entertainment. Instead, he spent time meeting with community organizations, law enforcement leaders, and young people considering careers in public service. His message never centered on anger. It centered on responsibility. The law is strongest, he often said, when every person believes it belongs to them. Ryan Walker's days looked very different now. He was no longer behind the wheel of a patrol car. His suspension had ended, but his return came with strict conditions. He attended advanced training, completed community engagement programs, and spent long hours studying cases where poor judgment had changed lives forever. None of it erased his mistake. None of it was intended to. Every lesson reminded him that redemption was measured by consistency, not intention. One afternoon, Ryan volunteered at a youth mentorship event sponsored jointly by local police and community leaders. He expected awkward conversations. Instead, he found himself answering honest questions from teenagers who wanted to know what accountability actually looked like. Ryan paused before answering. "It begins," he said quietly, "the day you stop defending your worst decision and start learning from it." Standing across the room, Marcus overheard the response. Their eyes met for only a moment. No handshake followed. No dramatic reconciliation unfolded. None was necessary. Respect sometimes grew strongest in silence. Later that evening, Marcus drove home through the same neighborhood where everything had begun. Children played basketball in nearby driveways. Neighbors waved as he pulled into his driveway. The house looked exactly as it had on that ordinary morning months before, yet everything around it somehow felt different. Not because the past had disappeared, but because people had chosen not to waste its lesson. As the sun settled below the horizon, its final light reflected softly across the front porch where one calm decision after another had once been ignored. Marcus stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. Justice had never arrived because of his title. It had arrived because truth refused to stay hidden. And somewhere in the city, future officers would make slower, wiser decisions without ever knowing the name of the man whose dignity had changed an entire department. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not proving who you are. It is leaving behind a world where no one has to. He thought the badge made him powerful. In the end, the truth proved far stronger. A year later, the story had quietly faded from newspaper headlines, but it had not disappeared from the people whose lives it had touched. Some lessons were too important to be archived. They continued to live inside everyday choices, shaping decisions long after public attention had moved elsewhere. On a crisp spring morning, Officer Ryan Walker stood outside another suburban home, responding to a routine call. A concerned neighbor had reported an unfamiliar vehicle parked in a driveway. 1 year earlier, Ryan would have stepped out of his patrol car, convinced that immediate action was the safest answer. This time he walked slowly. He knocked gently on the front door and waited. Moments later, an elderly man answered with a puzzled smile. "Can I help you, officer?" Ryan returned the smile. "Good morning, sir. We received a call from a neighbor who wasn't sure whether the vehicle belonged here. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right." The man laughed softly. "It belongs to my granddaughter. She's visiting for the weekend." Ryan nodded. "Thank you for clearing that up. Have a wonderful day." The entire conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. No raised voices. No accusations. No unnecessary comments. As Ryan walked back toward his patrol car, he glanced briefly at the quiet front porch. A single memory crossed his mind. The morning he had stood outside Marcus Bennett's home, believing certainty mattered more than patience. This time, patience had taken only a few extra moments. It had prevented another mistake. Across the city, Marcus Bennett addressed a graduating class at the Federal Law Enforcement Leadership Academy. He stood before hundreds of young officers preparing to begin careers built on public trust. He did not mention Ryan by name. He did not describe the arrest that had changed both of their lives. Instead, he shared one simple thought. Every person you meet carries a story you cannot see. Your responsibility is not to write that story for them. Your responsibility is to give them the fairness to tell it themselves. The room remained silent as the graduates reflected on the words. They understood they were hearing something greater than a speech. They were hearing the foundation of justice itself. Later that afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It contained no official seal, no legal language, and no request for forgiveness. Inside was a single handwritten note from Ryan. Thank you for showing me that accountability is not the end of a career. It is the beginning of becoming worthy of it. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his desk without replying. Some conversations did not require another answer. They required a life lived differently. As evening settled over the city, lights slowly illuminated homes, streets, and neighborhoods where strangers continued meeting one another every day. Some wore uniforms. Some carried titles. Most carried neither. Yet each deserved the same dignity under the law. Because justice was never meant to belong to the powerful. It was always meant to protect the ordinary. And perhaps that was the greatest reversal of all. The officer who believed authority came from a badge discovered it came from humility. The man who was treated as if he belonged nowhere reminded an entire system what it truly meant to belong to everyone. That is how justice echoes long after the sirens fade.